Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Lucas. I'm the artistic director and curator at Artspace, and I'll be facilitating the event tonight. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Artspace and myself are located on the traditional territory of the Mishi-Sagi-Nishnabeg First Nation within the boundaries of Nogoji-Winong. I'm excited to introduce tonight and welcome José Andrés Mora to talk about his practice and exhibition, The Mornings in Reverse, which is on at Artspace until May 14th. Jose is a Venezuelan-Canadian artist whose work reflects the intimate politics of language with a particular focus on experiences around displacement, cultural hybridity, and assimilation. Before I turn things over to Jose to tell us more, I just want to let everyone know that the talk will be followed by a Q&A. So please feel free to leave any questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those at the end. I also want to make note that this talk is being live captioned or transcribed, whichever you prefer. So if you want or need to follow along with text, on the top left of your screen, you'll see a live button on custom live streaming. If you click that and click view, a new window will pop up, and there you'll see a live as we go transcription of everything Jose says. And with that, I will hand it over to Jose.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Lucas? Yeah. You disappeared before you could give me a
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. So yes, everything will be on the record permanently, written by a live captioning service. Thanks, thank you, Lucas. Thanks to everyone. I have to begin this, obviously, just like thanking everyone that made this exhibition possible. Dylan, Lucas, and Hazel from Artspace Peterborough. And thank you to all parts and invisible hands that made the exhibition happen, and including from equipment lending or of helping putting the show together, my partners, infinite hours of help, and the community that helps me with the generosity of their time and interest. I'm incredibly grateful. I'm gonna start sharing my screen now because I almost forgot to do that. And just give me 1 second. Okay. Share the screen. Excellent. So, hello. My name is José Andrés. I'm an artist and I live in Toronto. I'm 33 years old and I have lived 18 of those years inside the territories that we refer to as Canada. I grew up in Venezuela until my family first moved to Vancouver in 2004. And then I moved to Halifax to attend NASCAD. And before that, I moved to, before moving to Toronto. And then I went to Guelph for a little bit to do my MFA. And then I ended up in Toronto again. For some reason, I'm here. Right, so in summary, here are the facts about me. It really is a privilege to hold your attention today, so thank you. I don't take the investment of your time for granted, and I cherish your time. I'm here to talk about my process for writing, process for image making, and why disorientation in my work, specifically in this show, is of interest to me or meaningful to me. And I thought it would be interesting or nice to begin to talk speaking about titles. Titles in general, titles for art, names for places, and I basically talk about the names that we give to some things. This slide is a slide of a screenshot of I think it's my first public work, a second or third, I don't know, one of my early public works that I did for New Blanche. And the reason why I'm showing it will become apparent soon. The title of my exhibition is The Mornings in Reverse. And for anyone who hasn't seen the show yet, the exhibition is a collection of 9 artworks that are exhibiting in the exhibition space at Artscape Peterborough. There are 9 frame prints, 1 sculptural installation, 1 video, and one media artwork. So titles, exhibitions and their titles, and artworks and their titles, and places and their names, businesses and their names, but more specifically, the written signage, the object that shows the text that names those things, that are sitting next to those things that they are naming. Those letters, those words are kind of more specifically what I want to start beginning talking about. Titles of artworks were the first place where I actually started writing seriously, weirdly, primarily because I started my career. When I started my career, I was afforded this sort of like little bit of extra real estate in which I could do something. And as a young artist, I just really wanted those few extra inches that the title occupied, in which I could continue to do my work and spill over and take over whatever printed material I could take over or contaminate or just like infiltrate. And so this is what the slide is. It's like one of the first like titles that I was like, okay, like let's see how we can do this. I'm moving on to a piece called Reeler, which is an exhibition gallery at the gallery right now. This is the documentation from a previous exhibition, and I'll talk about that piece a little bit more, contextualize it a little bit more. The physical presence of the title of the text that's there on the piece of paper on the wall, or on the wall glued to the wall in vinyl, or the text that's pointing to the work, like saying that that's the work. That process of naming and designating and indexing is interesting to me because it's a type of text and language that exists only in relationship to something else. A title on its own without an artwork to refer to is not really a title anymore. It's just words sitting on some surface. And just like the name of a street without a name to the name, or it's not something else, those words are something, whether or not the title or the name of anything, because the thing doesn't exist. Yet the signage and the words remain, even when the thing is not present. These are slides of the process behind putting together or images of process, or of kind of process images of Reeler and what's behind it. I'm talking about all of this because this idea, which is like not particularly mind-blowing actually, but that a piece of text could exist to only make sense in relationship to something else, actually did blow my mind a little bit, because it pointed towards a kind of specificity to written language. That the sort of the appropriateness of the words and the materials that display the words and the place where the words are, where the words are, feed the meaning of the text. The written language on its own is not enough to give meaning to the text. There's a concert of things that are happening, physical things that are there to give meaning to the text. And by physical, I mean material, color, size, place, time, etc. All of those things come together to give a sense to what it is that you're reading and why it's there. We're watching right now an excerpt of one of the videos that's in the exhibition titled Time and Light. I want to make sure that it's playing. It was not playing. Good thing that I did that. The title for this exhibition, this is speaking about title, so I guess I got to continue on this. The title for this exhibition comes from a piece of short fiction, actually, that I wrote before I even started working on the exhibition itself. And this drafted short story has both nothing and everything to do with the exhibition that's happening right now. And I'm gonna be that person. I'm not really gonna talk about the written piece too much. Sorry to be a tease. I won't read the work at all because it's actually not necessary, and I also don't think there's enough time to go like for me to read a piece of writing. But to give you a gist of it, the short narrative is the inner monologue of someone who's on their way to attend a remembrance dinner of a friend who recently passed away from suicide. And at one point, the narrator describes the feeling of suspension of time and loss of geographic and temporal orientation. And the line from which I take the title for the exhibition goes, "A sunset is a sunrise in reverse. The parenthesis of my day opened against my will to sleep before dawn and would close against my will to sleep after dusk." This is a process installation shot of the exhibition, of the piece that we were just watching. And it shows the process of alignment of the videos and sort of like delicate putting together of technology that goes behind this work. So the show's title, "The Morning in Reverse," may as well be the nights or the evenings or the sunsets. The title is a reference simply to the slow transition of colors that play in the sky at sunrise and sunset, and how they mirror each other, and how the forward direction of time and our memory of geography are what differentiates what a sunset is from a sunrise. And I said that the narrative that I wrote has everything and nothing to do with the exhibition, because in the exhibition itself, there's a strong undercurrent. There's the strong undercurrent of the process of citation and the process of meaning, of drawing meaning from excerpted text, and the process of drawing meaning from past and from memory. The story has nothing to do with the show, and that is not about the story at all. The exhibition is not really about the story, but it is the main source of language and imagery that I use to create the language for most of the text work in the exhibition. So currently, as I speak to you like today, like March 17, 2022, I have a kind of like personal allergy towards the way that citation works as a method for contextualizing or giving meaning to culture, particularly in an academic context. And it's a personal allergy, and I specify the word personal because I understand the value in meaningful discourse and understanding history. And I understand how looking back and building on the past has got instrumental value. But at least for now, I try to find nourishment in not citing from any particular canon to form the language that my work pretends to cite. This is a piece in the exhibition called "Domestic Entropy." The process of citation is a tool of power despite intention, and can create meaning or certainty where there may be nothing but a mirage. And there's a kind of relationship that I have to the process of citation and certainty in explaining within a certain canon that maybe translates to a kind of resentment for its power and the appetite that it creates for certainty, particularly when I feel that I embody a culture of uncertainty. And in short, I mean, we can describe this feeling as describing the Western canon as being so established and deeply full of itself that any reference or any citation either exists within it or outside of it. And I think that is a false dichotomy. How does a text read when the source is known? I talk about why I find writing being so fascinating to me. Sorry, I'm reading from my notes, so now I missed a comma and now I'm all lost. I talk about why I found writing being fascinating to me because it's so attached to an object. And this concept is useful for me in my work because when grafted onto the surface of materials I work with, my writing is, I feel it's uniquely tied to the material and sight and experience of the text as an object rather than just writing. And part of the process of disorientation for me begins in the removal of information from its source and its attachment to the surface of the art object that I'm creating. And I see my studio and image making practice as the process in which this sort of transference occurs. This is an install shot of the exhibition. My interest in creating a sort of feedback loop that happens within my work, and by this I mean sort of the self-referencing and the referencing the things that I write and sort of obscuring the source to create enough familiarity while simultaneously creating an absence of reference to the reader. The traces, the stories are there, but my intention ultimately is for a viewer to walk into a space and feel the text is displaced, and I want the reader to feel uncertain of what they're experiencing. In our practice, I've been sort of experimenting throughout my entire work. I've been experimenting with ways of giving meaning to this experience of displacement in a way that where the meaning is created in the interaction between the viewer and the work. And on that note, I'm going to now rotate through some of the images, a few more images, and sort of speak a little bit more directly now about the process and behind certain works, and keeping in mind that sort of introduction that I just did right now. And hopefully after that, we can open it for questions. So this work, Dissolve, is one of the 3 text-based prints that are in the exhibition. The process of which I created these images is a process of intentionally trying to I'm speaking specifically about these text-based prints. It's a process that intends to simulate the decay of the material, the printed material over time. And there's I attempt in the slow in the way that the work begins to fade to illustrate a sort of passage of time that describes where the object was in relationship to the light that damaged it. I was particularly interested with these works in creating and using the process of inkjet printing with some intention of creating an object that was a contradiction to its archival quality. And then there are the images that have no text, of course. And the reason why these images are there, and now I have to sort of begin talking a little bit more about how I approach things formally, is these images began as a offshoot from the works that began as sort of simulations of decay, and implemented. What I was doing with these images was implement the same the same tools that are the same sort of vocabulary of tools that I use to create these images, to create the suggestion of photographic documentation of places or landscapes or objects. Primarily, I was working with places and with places because of my interest in this exhibition of sort of like site specificity and memory of places. It's an underlying theme and one of the different underlying references in the work. And so with these images, I was interested in using the tools that I use for creating the sun damage image to fabricate a pictorial, sort of the pigment that pretended to be a certain place. And the sort of like this idea of certainty is present in these works too, because of their suggestion or pretending to be photographic representations that are out of focus. I want to talk a little bit about the process of making these, because I have had a really hard time explaining to people, like, because I was using a very specific tool that was I can only really describe as vector drawing. And what I refer to when I say that is this is one of the versions of this piece. There's a sort of like slow construction of these pieces by which I'm asking the computer to basically calculate the fading of color between this color and these colors, and it's all calculations of that the computer is doing based on like where different points are and what value of colors they have and how close they are to each other, and all of these sort of different factors influence the way that the image comes together and form the pixels, I guess, come together to form an image. And for anyone that's curious, I'm specifically using a tool like that probably everyone knows, like Adobe Illustrator. It's just a very specific tool that I started using because of its yielding an effect that I wasn't quite anticipating, of creating a suggestion of photographic, a sort of like a photographic image that was out of focus. And this is sort of like a bit of a side note, but like this is actually something that I'm very interested in working with in media art, and something that I constantly seek in media art, like, is like, when I'm working with different technologies, is there's a sort of understanding of media art being like very precise, in the sense of like you always know what you want to do and you look for that result. But I'm way more interested in what the technology can't do and what it will do despite your attempts to try to make it do something, or what kind of it will like present you with, which becomes a lot more interesting to me, rather than trying to yield and force a material to do something. Kind of like working with it a little bit more organically. This image is similar to the other work. It's an exact same process of trying to put together distorted or out of focus photographic representation of a place. It's worth mentioning that neither of these are things that exist, I guess, which is, I think, kind of where, I mean, it kind of like makes sense within the context of the exhibition. And by saying that they don't exist, like, I'm not using a reference material to make the images. This work, Rogue Element, is in the list of artworks that I mentioned. I mentioned there was one media art work, which it's kind of like the only way that I have for describing this piece. It's a device, an assemblage of different hardware components that broadcast. I can broadcast up to 17 different Wi-Fi networks. And the particular assembly that I did was to I put together these pieces of equipment with a battery, so that in theory this work is a sort of like roaming agent, a tool that can be covertly deployed in any space, in any public space. And what it does is that it produces a text using the Wi-Fi network names as a sort of medium for creating text. You know, I talked earlier about like how I was interested in like kind of like taking over like any square inch, any inch I can take over, and this work kind of really exemplifies that. In the process of searching for a Wi-Fi network, if you're somebody who's in a public space, you will open a window usually in your device, wherein you will see the list of available networks, and you'll try to find the one that you can access for free, like, I don't know, like via rail or etc. And my intention with this work is like it's a piece of artwork that is intended to be carried into these public spaces without the knowledge of anyone knowing that it's there, so that in a place where people will be opening their devices to look for a Wi-Fi network, they suddenly encounter a list of words that are addressing someone and have an intention that goes beyond just designating or indexing a Wi-Fi network. There's a sort of calling that it's existing there. And this work in particular doesn't have a exact text attached to it, meaning that I plan to use this. My intention to use this device is to have different text in it. This is just the iteration of what it's broadcasting currently in Artspace. So hopefully someone stumbled upon it by accident. And yeah, I really was interested in ending the note, the segment in which I talk about my works and with this artwork. And what I'm going to do is, before Lucas, we open it for questions if there are any questions, hopefully. I'm going to go back a few slides, and I'm just going to leave one of the video pieces playing in the background, just because they are works that sort of unfold slowly, and my intention with these works specifically I intend for them to be a sort of like a slow experience of reading, I guess. They intend to not really have a beginning or end. So yeah, Lucas, whenever you want to appear. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Jose. That was great, and it's so great. I've been working with Jose over the last number of months on this, and it's amazing to still be able to learn more about the work in your process through this talk. So thank you. So yeah, we'll open the floor to questions. If anyone has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will relay those to Jose. I do have one that comes to mind just off the bat to kind of kick things off, and that is in thinking through the individual works and the installation, I was wondering if you could speak specifically to some of the pairings in the layout, like how you come to the decision to take individual works and pair them with others or closer to others, or how you kind of come to a point of creating dialogue through those pairings.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it's, in a way, it kind of goes into an aspect of making that it's almost like the culmination of like kind of what I'm seeking for, which is like, because these works are so slow. Some of these works are very slow to come together. Like, they take a long time to come together. For example, this work is it takes a long time to put together because like there's such a restriction in the kind of like writing space that it's there, that by the time it comes to installing an exhibition, the pairings that you're talking about, it becomes a much more intuitive putting together of material that I can really only describe as a finding sense through a sort of like a more formal understanding of the work, which I know it sounds kind of like a very cop-out kind of answer, but what informs my pairing of work is it's a much more, it's kind of like the test of like I work on these pieces of where there's a thematic undercurrent and a formal undercurrent, and the putting together of the exhibition is kind of like, okay, like does it actually work together? And the decisions, like I wish I can give you a more precise coordinates to like my thought process for it, but if I'm being honest, it's a lot more of a how to distribute the amount of reading that happens in an exhibition space, how to distribute the size of font as well. I take a lot of considerations that are considering the reading experience, because because I've talked so much about that very site specific interaction with a text. So yeah, no precise answer, but I hope that kind of gives some hints towards the very general triangulating I do.
Absolutely. We have a question that came in through the Q&A. It reads, I'm curious that Rogue Lament is listed as an edition of 5. How do you see this work existing as an edition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a person, I think this question is hinting more, a little bit more the practicalities, or like the answer that I'm going to give hints at the practicalities of like how I think of it as an artist, and specifically about my studio practice. I operate better within constraints of like where something needs to like have an end to it. And Rogue Lament specifically has, maybe I didn't really speak about this a little bit. I didn't speak about this too clearly, but Rogue Lament does have a somewhat thematic thematic theme. That's the thematic background to it. That the writing that's going to happen for it is a type of writing that is entirely intended for the work to be sort of like this sort of a kind of like calling out or looking for someone or addressing someone in a way as though it hints towards a past conflict, and where the accumulations of text doesn't exactly quite reach a resolution. So there is sort of like a parameter for the work to exist within. Now, how they exist as an edition is a bit more creative, I guess. I'm not a very faithful relation. Like I'm not very. I made a decision to kind of be allowed to do within my art practice what I kind of like want to do. And when I speak about creating this work as an edition, is inviting a certain number of iterations of this work to exist within and exist within with the parameters of the text that I kind of give it. So in a way, it's kind of like a work that changes and lives. And when I said it's like, oh, I want to do work what I want to do, I'm not trying to be like silly about it, but like I'm just saying, like I think it to me is more interesting to allow a work that has a kind of like flexibility to continue growing, and its material reproduction will only exist within like certain number of iterations. A part of it is like, I guess, like a commercial understanding of that things have to have certain limits. But it's also, luckily for me, it's also a way for me to like exist within a certain restraint, that there's like 5 works that exist of this particular, 5 iterations of this work that exist. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you. We got another question through the Q&A. It reads, can you elaborate on how you navigate your process of omission of subjectivity in your work? Does it happen during your writing process or during your making?
Omission of subjectivity in the process or making, how do I, can you repeat the question again?
Sure.
I want to answer properly.
It reads, can you elaborate on how you navigate your process of omission of subjectivity in your work? Does it happen during your writing or during your making?
Making, for sure. In the writing, I kind of have, it's sort of like a place where I can indulge in forming or of having a subjective presence as much as I want. And the process of omission of subjectivity happens in the studio practice for me. How I filter out the subject or the subjective aspect is, it definitely happens in the making process, and that has a particular meaning to me in that that's interesting to me. The reason why that's interesting to me is because that's where there's a filtering process happening, and there's a decision to eliminate subjectivity. Whereas like if I was writing specifically omitting subjectivity, that process of filtering or editing wouldn't be happening. So yeah, that's a really good question. All these are really good questions. Thank you. I really appreciate them.
Yeah, we've got a lot of good questions. We've got a few more coming in through the Q&A.
Hit me.
One from Rebecca, which reads that they would love to ask you about the use of horizon in your work, both in the strong horizontals of your work, but also in terms of the sunset, sunrise.
Wow, that is a question I never not have expected. It's so good. It's good because I'm thinking about it. I'm answering this question right now, which is why I'm looking up to the side, being quiet. There's a particular interest that I have, which I think would maybe fall under the category of repertoire of imagery that I lean towards. And there is, for me, an ample possibility for playing with orientation and displacement when the references that I make are topographic or geographic or related to a kind of like interaction between person and place. And in this particular exhibition, I was really excited to really work on the imagery of sort of like with the imagery of well, kind of atmospheric imagery or imagery of the skies and sun and light. And you know, like I was talking about like how like in the text that kind of underlies the exhibition, there's a moment in which the person loses orientation and does they have a sense of orientation. And so I guess to answer the question, so I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess that the reason why there's such a strong presence of the horizon is because I have such a strong interest in using our sense of disorientation to our landscapes as like this, or as kind of like as a place to like interrupt how we orient ourselves, if that makes sense. But I had not thought about that entirely or formulated it, so thank you for the question.
We have another one. It reads, by using language in a sculptural and material way, are you concerned about the legibility of the intended text to be read by the viewer? Is it important that your poems are read in a linear way?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Legibility and linearity are like, okay, this is great. This is fun. So, okay, linearity. I've worked specifically with loops. Loops are in a way, kind of like the medium that I work with when I'm working with video. And the reason why I work with loops is because when a text exists, or like, actually, this is actually beyond text, when a video exists in a space, specifically when a video is existing in a place and it's playing on a loop, there is a constant variable, which is the point of entry between viewer, the point of interaction at which like a viewer enters the work. And that variable to me is really fascinating because it really makes it so that there is, you have you're unable to predict the point, the way that your work is interacted, because it's time-based and it's playing all the time. And when I work with video, I 100% all the time work with an understanding that I'm creating text that doesn't have beginnings or ends. That is just like, I get like that is when I start a new piece of writing that I know it's going to be time-based, is just, that is at the top of my list. Okay, it's like nobody's going to be like, no one's going to understand. Sorry, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like no one's going to perceive a beginning or an end. The end and the end and the start and the end are going to be particular to that person's experience. And I try to craft the words for that piece so that there is meaning in any, or there is enough information in any length of interaction, whether the person reaches the end. Sorry, I think I spotted an error. I think I uploaded the version of this video that has a mistake in it. Sorry about that. But my intention is for the writing to have sort of multiple layers of interpretation based on like whether like a person stays till the point at which the video loops, or they exit the video before the text, or before the video ends. To me, it's always about text, and because I'm working with language, or in written language specifically. But I think that's a quality of video in general, and specifically video in, I guess, galleries. And in terms of legibility, that legibility is really something that maybe I just like started to refine more and more. It's like, I used to kind of like not really be like, like it's not legible, whatever. Like, but like it's kind of really unfair for a reader to like not be able to access text, and so even when I work with text that is not easily read, my intention is always for legibility to exist. The more I obstruct legibility, the more I am interested in a long interaction with the work, but not an interrupted interaction with the work. Like if I'm obscuring the moment of understanding what the words are saying, is because I'm trying to pay attention. I'm trying to draw some of the attention away from the text towards the material and what's happening, and kind of like encourage kind of like a bit of a slower living to get a slower reading experience. And thank you for that question.
Of course. I personally have a question that kind of comes to mind thinking about that, is Knowing that the drawing process that you use is new for you in the creation of this work, what was your interaction with the work like from on-screen drawing to actually seeing the printed framed mounted thing face to face? Because what I mean, maybe people saw it in the information for the artwork, but for example, the large pink and green that Jose demonstrated how the process was done is 4 feet by 4 feet. So it is quite, it has scale and it meets you where you're at. So what was that experience like for you in terms of engaging with that piece that way?
Yeah, thank you. That experience was refreshing. I used to. This is like, I. It's funny because I'm so obsessed with like written language, but I did like 3 years of just like pure printmaking and painting when I was in school, and before I even touched like a piece of writing before, and I kind of have always had a craving. I'm speaking personally here. I've had a bit of a craving to return to a more image-based interaction with work, and the process of going from screen to printed image is not entirely new to me, because I've worked before with printing processes, and I kind of understand there's a certain amount of rolling of the dice, which I kind of don't mind. And but I also, like I'm very lucky to be able to work with someone who's a very professional printer, who is willing to just walk me through the processes and understanding of like how images translate from light-based display technology to like ink-based, like additive to subtractive. Color is there's a whole field of study to understand that, and I only try to understand a certain amount, and at another point it's just like, okay, well, kind of like, let's see what happens. But because I've like I do proofing and I do testing and I do small things, I kind of like approach it carefully, and then there reaches the point where it's like, okay, like let's just see let's just see what it does. Yeah.
Maybe a good follow-up to that, another question to the Q&A reads, what is the insertion of color in your work?
Gosh, so many good questions. Insertion of color. I guess it's different for the different works. I'm going to talk about the printed works first, because they're so explicitly color based, I guess. Like there's so much about like color and the way that color decays. I guess it's two things. The insertion of color is it has to have a certain amount of sense for me, whatever the color to exist. And it also, there's a part of me that is just like trying to, and there's another part of me that is just like, it feeds a craving that I have for just like creating, like looking like things that look good. But for me to find like a way for the color to make sense, it's actually quite important. And the prints was, I try to pick colors that were that had the potential to show an interesting process of decolorization. So when I worked, say for example, with a pink. Oh, I didn't show the pink work, but there is a print that's like entirely pink in the main color, and well, I mean, it also happens with the blue work and the red text. Let me find it. Oh no, I was further behind. There we go. Sorry, my apologies. I just saw you. There we go. So there what happens here that I find particularly interesting is that when I started doing the dissolving effect, I was consciously trying to think of two things, like which colors color fast first when red ink is exposed to light, which would be red and yellow are the first two colors to go when things start to become sun damaged, and how does the paper underneath remain, like what level of protection does the ink give to like the paper that was the ink, the paper that was underneath it. And so when I was thinking, when I was working with color for these prints, I was trying to use the color as much as I could to try to create a mimicry of an object, of a printed object that was subject to decay. And that is specifically for these prints. It's a little bit different for the video pieces, for example, but for the Wi-Fi pieces, like whatever text is on the screen, whatever color is there. The three panel light and time video, yellow kind of seemed like a natural color to lean towards. It's in a very basic referential way to light, and in a way that is just sort of in a way kind of basic, but also I opted to use a form of blending in that work that is not just the kind of like color sits on top of color. It's using, I forget what blending mode I use, I'm so sorry, but it reacts differently based on the color that's behind it, and I did that with an intention of creating a sense of translucence. Reeler is more as a color in that piece, works kind of a little bit more with like material, what kind of materials you get, like in the kind of like Reeler is interesting to me because like it's more of a piece that exists as conditions, and where material and color are sort of like they happen based on like how things happen to make the system work. So color and Reeler is like a little bit kind of, I'm a little bit more like whatever happens with that work. And I choose specifically white on black because of legibility, and it kind of works also with it worked with a piece in terms of creating a sort of like a more sort of somber presence of white against black. Yeah, so I guess those are some of the considerations around colors. Thank you for asking me about color, because I don't get to talk about color very often.
We've got another question in the Q&A. Starts off reading, this body of work and the whole installation is amazing. Wondering how long it took you to build and execute the entire show.
Thank you. First of all, that's very kind. The exhibition, the printed works. When did we start talking, Lucas?
The summer?
The summer. So the prints and the 3-panel video, I would say altogether took about 4 months, because I was working on other stuff since we talked to come together. The Reeler piece, that took like a year to put together. That's been refined. I wouldn't say a year. I'd say maybe 8 months. That took about 8 months, and that works. It's the older work here in this exhibition. It's a piece that I produced in 2020 when I was doing my MFA program, and it probably it's funny because like it works. It's great. That's like there are aspects of it. Like every time I install it, I'm like changing. Like I'm like improving the program a bit more and making it just a little bit more reliable each time. So I guess it's still like, in a lot of ways, sort of like as a piece of software, it's still like changing in those in those terms. But yeah, I guess like 8 months of Reeler plus 4 months of everything else, so about a year. I guess would be the math.
Plus a lot of elbow grease during the install.
Elbow grease during the install and tears and coffee.
And it seems like that might be the last question, unless there are any questions slowly making their way in right now. This might be a good opportunity to wrap it up. So with that, I will say a huge, huge thank you to Jose for producing the show, bringing it to Artspace, and also for doing this talk and sharing with us kind of like the inside scoop on how it is and what it is. And also the opportunity to invite everybody to please come to Artspace to check out the show. It is a really beautiful and thoughtful show that Jose worked incredibly hard on producing. It would be, you don't want to miss it. We'll leave it at that. We are going to be having a reception on Saturday, April 23rd, where we will also be launching the digital publication, which will include an essay by Camila Salcedo. And I think that's it from me. No other questions came in. So with that, we'll close off. Thank you again, Jose, so much for everything.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thank you. It's an opportunity that I don't take for granted. So thanks.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for showing up and asking your questions. And we hope to see you at Artspace sometime soon. With that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye-bye.